body, seemed to be a very pleasant, open, kind sort of person. He picked up on this right away. And he was immediately struck also with the fact that she was very pretty and very nice looking. He remarks in his notes that she was very pretty. But he says she doesn't act pretty. She didn't act like a woman who was aggressively trying to use her looks or whatever. She was just a very pleasant, down-to-earth sort of person. He was still sitting under the tree when she walked up. She extended her hand, which he took, and pulled him up. Billy only has one arm at this point. He, on his travels when he was going through India and Greece, he had lost his left arm in a bus accident. A bus had hit his car and taken his arm off. So he only had the one right arm at this point. In his earlier contacts, he had two arms. So he stood up, and they began to talk, and she says, let's walk over by where your moped is, and they sit down on the grass, and she says, today, this will be our first contact, and I don't have time for you to ask questions. I have a lot of things to explain to you. And she says, then later on, I'll allow you to ask questions at other contacts. And he kind of interrupted her, and, as she was talking, and said, well, who are you, and why have you come in here? And she remarked, well, for quite some time that her people had wanted to find someone who could help them in their mission to make things clear to the people of Earth. On several occasions, they had tried to have contacts with various people, but it hadn't worked out. These people had either been afraid of what other people would say about them, or they were, afraid they were going to go insane, or they just lacked loyalty and sincerity to help them out. But they had been studying Billy now for 10 years. It had been 10 years since he'd had any contacts, and they'd been watching and listening to his thoughts and watching him and studying him to make sure that they wanted to follow through with these contacts. She had studied him for the 10 years, she said, and she had gone to the trouble of learning his language. She was speaking to him in German, but oddly enough, it wasn't a regular German. It wasn't the German of his day. It was the German as it was spoken almost 300 years previous to that, in what Billy calls King's German. So they had a little fun with the language. Quite often they had trouble understanding each other. But she had learned this language somehow, through some sort of computer system, something like we would do when you sleep, and you would listen to a tape and pick it up. It took her about 20 days to pick up the language and so forth, and then she practiced with a language expert, and that's how she picked it up. And so she was speaking German to Billy. She told him that there were several reasons why they were going to have the contacts, and several things that her and her people would like to make clear to the human beings. One thing, she noticed that she told Billy that he was allowed to bring a camera, and she told him that photo proofs were going to be allowed for the first time. That for many years, different people had claimed to be having contacts with extraterrestrials, but most of these people were just deceivers or charlatans or kind of deceived in their own mind, and that most of them, it was quite untrue. But for the first time, they were going to allow someone to take very clear pictures of their ships for proofs. And so she had invited him to bring the camera along, and that later on he'd be able to take even clearer and better pictures. There's a few other things they wanted to make clear also. One, they were going to pass on a lot of information about religions. They wanted to make it clear that they did not come to Earth on behalf of any religion and were not connected to any. They told him that later on that there would be a lot of education about religions and the problems, some of the problems that religions were causing on the planet, because they felt that we were rather spiritually stagnant, that we had been misled by many different belief structures and religions, and that we had not really come close to the real accurate information about what was going on in the universe. She very quickly explained to him that there is a creational force or a creational energy that actually is above all other life forms in the universe. It is not a human form. That which we think of as gods in human form are also subject to creation, and that there would be a lot of other information about that later on. They were a little disturbed, apparently, that many people claim to be having contacts with extraterrestrials and quite often attribute it to some religion, or they were becoming on behalf of Jesus or a god or whatever, and they wanted to make it very clear that that was not true, that they were not coming on behalf of anyone else. They just felt a kinship to us like little brothers because we shared a common ancestry, which she would explain more about later on, but they came on their own behalf. She also wanted to explain that no one else that they were familiar with had ever ridden in flying saucers or beam ships, as they called them, and had not visited any other human life forms in our solar system. She even told him flatly, there are no other life forms in your solar system. There used to be in ancient times on some other planets, but at this current time that the Earth was the only planet in our solar system which supported life, and that other people who were claiming that were just making it up or were lying. Along with the religious information, they also wanted him to know that they were going to lead Billy, and they were aware that Billy already knew this, but Billy would be led to a man who had dug up some old writings from Emmanuel, the man who is commonly called Jesus Christ. These writings had been dug up and were being translated out of Aramaic and represented the original writings and teachings of the man we call Jesus Christ. They call him Emmanuel. Apparently there was no one named Jesus Christ. His real name was Emmanuel, and his name was changed in the writings later on to Jesus Christ in the year 186. And they were going to have this person who had these old scrolls written by the original writings of Emmanuel, that Billy would be led to this man. They would come together, and that Billy would write a very good book explaining the truths all about Jesus Christ and the forming of Christian religion to the world, so we would know what was true and what wasn't true. Okay. She also commented to Billy that later on that he'd be allowed to go with her in the beam ships and go for on rides and so forth. He naturally had curiosity about where she had come from and how the ship was flying, and she did tell him that she was from the Pleiades, about 450 light years away, and that the ship that she got here in was called a beam ship. She remarked, by the way, that her name was Semjase, spelled S-E-M-J-A-S-E. These beam ships, as she called it, operated on two propulsion systems. They had a light-emitting system for speeds below the speed of light. Actually, what they called the security band, that they could use these this light emitting device could be used within 153 million kilometers of a solar system. Beyond that, they had another system, something like a tachyon drive, for speeds well beyond the speed of light. Actually, they said that with the tachyon drives, they could break into what's called null time, where they could actually collapse time and space, causing them to fold into one another, and they could break into null time. And in this null time mode, that the ship could actually travel billions of light years just in a fraction of time, and then reappear wherever it needed to be. That there would be more information on that later, but this was not an area that they wanted to explain an awful lot about, because they didn't feel that we needed any help in our technology. They were mostly concerned that our technology was far in advance of our social development, and we needed far more help in those areas. So that was the basic content of the first meeting, which lasted, I believe, about an hour and 20 minutes, and then Semjase got into her ship and took off, and Billy snapped a couple of more pictures, and the contacts had then begun. One other thing that she did talk about in the first meeting, which I forgot to mention, that they brought up on several occasions, was that we have to become aware here on Earth that there are many other races who actually visit our planet, and not all of them are particularly friendly. She noted that on quite a few occasions, rather barbaric type races would come here and actually see some of our own people and use them for experiments, sometimes even take them back to their own world and use them in whatever. Apparently this is something that they couldn't stop altogether and really do anything about. She also mentioned that the time was kind of rapidly approaching when we could be openly having problems with some other races out there. Apparently we are afforded a certain measure of protection by the Pleiadians as long as technically we're not able to leave our solar system. And once we are able to do that, then we're going to fall under a whole new set of rules out there. So that's a rather important idea, because that's these contacts now since 1975. Now we're in 1992. So there's been several years gone by, and we're becoming more and more aware that there are many other races visiting Earth, some of them not very friendly. An awful lot of people have been abducted, and who knows how many people may be missing or whatever. So perhaps they were quite right back in 75 in warning us about that. Well, Billy, after the first contact, went home. The contacts continued almost on